My parents testified against it in my son's custody trial, but now they want to fix things because no one paid them what they promised. Hello, this is going to be a little long because there is a lot of context that I have to mention so that everything makes sense. I got divorced a few months ago, but it had been in the works for almost a year. My name is Mary. I met my ex-husband, Thomas, through friends when I was 25, and after dating for 2 years, we decided to move in together and get married. His family was a little conservative and extra, and not everyone approved of living together. So we had to get married if we wanted to stay together. And I really liked Thomas, so I didn't see any problem in marrying him. My parents also agreed with that decision, and so we got married. Within a year of living together, I discovered that I was pregnant, and we were very happy. We felt like our family was really coming together and that everything was falling into place. But unfortunately, when I announced that I was pregnant, my in-laws started pressuring me to quit my job and focus on being a mother. It wasn't any easier because my job wasn't very flexible with maternity leave, and since I hadn't spent much time working with them, my maternity leave would be especially short. So at that point, I weighed the pros and cons and decided to quit my job. It wasn't a decision I made alone. Thomas and his parents kept telling me that it would be the best long-term decision, and I just had to do it. Thomas seemed pretty sure about everything and said he would take care of the family. I didn't have to worry about money. He would bring enough to the house, and all I had to think about was raising our son. My parents and my older brother also thought it would be best if I quit my job and stayed home because that's what my mother had done. And even though I had the choice to go back to work, she chose not to because it was a priority for her. She had a lot of pressure from both sides of the family, so I decided to quit when I was in my second trimester. Everything had been going well, and I had complete confidence in my husband that he would never let me down. That's why I left my thriving career to be a stay-at-home mom. However, shortly after my son was born, I realized that there was something strange about the way Thomas had been behaving in the last few months of my pregnancy. I never could understand it, but there was something strange in his energy and everything. Of course, he seemed happy when our son was born, and I thought things would go back to normal. But instead, they started to get worse. He started to be very irritable around me, and every time I tried to talk to him, he snapped back at me. The only time he seemed happy and content with life was when he was playing with our son. But other than that, he always seemed very upset to be home with me. So he spent long hours at work. And even on the weekends, he always found some excuse to not spend time with me. I just couldn't understand what was going wrong, but I kept trying my best to make our marriage work because, unlike him, I loved him and didn't want to give up on us. This trend continued for about 2 years after my son was born. He stayed at work a lot longer than necessary, and even when he was at home, he wasn't really with me. I couldn't complain about it because every time I tried to talk to him about it, he just told me that he was very tired from work and that it was not an easy task for him to be the sole breadwinner of the household. And that was really insulting to me because it wasn't like I wasn't able to bring money home on my own, but I had to depend on him because he had promised me that he would make it easy for me. A couple of times I even asked him if he would prefer me to go back to work so we could share all the expenses and he wouldn't have so much pressure. But he said it was an insult to him and his abilities as a man, plus my in-laws would never approve of it and we would have an argument with them if I went back to work. So I continued to stay at home and raise my son, who was practically the only thing that brought me joy because Thomas had changed and was no longer the man I had married just a year ago. I discovered that Thomas had been having an affair with one of his co-workers. It was extremely difficult for me to find out because I honestly had been a little suspicious for a long time and hadn't discovered anything. I even looked at his phone and his laptop a couple of times when he was asleep, but I didn't find anything. I knew all his passwords because he had written them down in his blog notes, but even that didn't help. It almost seemed like he had nothing to hide, and I felt like an idiot for even suspecting him. I even went through his belongings looking for a secondary phone or something, but again, I didn't find anything. At one point, I had started to believe that maybe I was just being paranoid, insecure, but the universe was on my side, and the proof of his infidelity was something I saw for myself. Thomas and I were throwing a pretty big birthday party for our son about a year ago, and he had invited the partner he was cheating on me with. She was a single mother with a son the same age as my son, so it didn't seem strange to me that he had invited her. She had also told me that she was a very close friend of yours, so I didn't suspect anything after my son cut his birthday cake. I decided to go to the upstairs bedroom because I wanted to change into something more comfortable for the party. But when I entered my room, I realized that my husband was already there, and also his co-worker sitting on his lap. They were kissing passionately when I surprised him, and it took me a couple of minutes to process what I was witnessing. First of all, it was my room that the two of them were in, and that was the most horrifying thing about it. Everything. And secondly, they didn't even break apart when they heard the door open, so I had to walk up to them and make my presence felt to get them to react. I'm pretty sure they thought it would be fun to kiss in my room at my house just for the thrill of it, but they probably didn't count on me having a complete breakdown. So I'm not proud of it, but knowing that what I had been suspecting for so long was actually true made something break inside me. I grabbed the co-worker by the hair and I started to drag her out of the room, and I was unstoppable from what I was told. Thomas is considerably stronger than me, but he couldn't stop me. I don't even remember most of it because I think I had some kind of fit of rage. I dragged her down with me, with Thomas right behind me, and pushed her into the middle of the room while everyone was there. I don't remember most of the things I said, but apparently I called her a bunch of derogatory names and told everyone what she and Thomas had been doing in my room. I didn't even notice. It didn't matter that my son was right there, and so were a bunch of his friends. Now that I think about it, it's extremely embarrassing and inappropriate, but at the time, it didn't even occur to me, and I was just screaming at the top of my lungs. My parents, my brother, and my in-laws were also present there, and I think it was my father who finally calmed me down and took me back to my room. Once inside my room, I completely broke down and started crying. I sobbed uncontrollably, but instead of staying with me and comforting me, my dad locked me inside my room and left. I guess I should have known right away that my parents didn't care. I had always known they cared more about appearances than being real, but that was just insane. No one came to check on me for the next few hours, and even after I calmed down considerably, I had no idea what was going on outside. I didn't even have my phone, so I couldn't even ask anyone. It was only after midnight that my brother took me out of the room. He didn't even ask me how I was. They probably would have made me stay in the room for longer if I hadn't started banging on the door like a crazy person. When I came out, I asked my brother what happened after they locked me in, and he told me that practically everyone had left after my nervous breakdown. He also said that Thomas left. I had gone with his parents and my son, and the only people in the house at that time were me and my parents. And he let me out of the room so we could discuss what we were going to do about it. Now, but my family's idea of arguing meant telling me that I had to apologize to all my guests for the way I had behaved at the party. And not only that, but I also had to apologize to my in-laws and Thomas for what I did. They told me that it was extremely difficult for him to convince her co-worker not to press charges against me because what I had done was an act of physical violence against her. So now I had to fix all this before things got worse than they were. I got upset with them and told them I told them to leave my house because I was not going to allow them to stay under my roof, and tell me that I had to apologize to my unfaithful husband. I had a big fight with my family because they told me that I owed them by fixing things and giving him this marriage a second chance, or else they would cut ties with me. So I told them to go ahead, because I had reached a point where I didn't give a damn what anyone else thought of me. I was going to file for divorce and get out of this mess, and I didn't need anyone's permission to do it. So I contacted the lawyer the next day and filed for divorce within a week of the incident. Thomas was notified. He actually had the audacity to be disappointed and surprised. He came home the day he was notified with the divorce papers and demanded an explanation. I told him there was no way I was going to take him back after what he had done and the way he had insulted me. We had a nasty verbal argument where I said many things to him and called him many names. He ended up promising her legal divorce. Proceedings were easier and simpler compared to the custody battle, since we had very few assets in common. The house belonged to me, and there was no doubt about it because I had bought it with my own money. The rest would be sold and the cost would be split between the two of us. We only had to wait 6 months due to the waiting period in our state, and after that, once we reached an agreement, the divorce would be finalized. The only thing we couldn't put ourselves into agreed was alimony that was owed, because I had to start from scratch. Since he had forced me to quit my job and I didn't have enough money of my own, he thought I shouldn't get any alimony at all. But of course, that wasn't possible. Since he had told me he would help me and make sure I never felt the need to work. Luckily, I had a couple of text messages to prove it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even been able to get that alimony. The divorce process was emotionally easier to handle. Drive for me because in my mind I had already disconnected from Thomas. But the custody battle is what really ruined me, because unfortunately my parents and my brother decided to betray me for money. My ex-husband and his lawyer were horrible people who started building a case against me for being a horribly neglectful and psychotic mother, to prove that I was not capable enough to handle the task of raising my son on my own. So Thomas and his parents were supposed to have full custody now. I assumed that my parents and my brother had to be bribed by my ex-in-laws because they had a lot of money, and I couldn't think of any other explanation as to why they had turned against me. In fact, I'm pretty sure they even started fawning over my ex-in-laws for their money in the first place. Anyway, Thomas accused me of being incapable and unfit to raise our son and demanded full custody because he was apparently a functional alcoholic with serious anger problems. They made up several incidents where he had apparently lost control and put my son at risk of being hurt. Of course, none of that had ever happened except when I discovered the infidelity, but they needed something to make me look like the bad guy in the story. I thought at least some people would be on my side in this, but all my friends decided to take their side. I think a lot of it had to do with me collapsing at my son's birthday party. But the worst betrayal of all was when my parents and brother also testified against me in court, stating that I needed rehabilitation and serious intensive therapy before I was even allowed to be near my son, because I was clearly not in my right mind. And that had probably also led to Thomas cheating. So, unfortunately, although we fought with my lawyer, whom I paid with the help of a friend who was still on my side, I couldn't get custody of my son. The cards were stacked against me, and there was very little I could do to avoid the inevitable. My lawyer and I had been doing our best to gather shreds of evidence to prove I was a good mother, but in the end, it was all for nothing. The verdict was announced a couple of months ago, and that was the last time I saw my son in person. I was granted supervised visitation rights, but Thomas never let me see him anyway, so it's a bit useless. He's 4 years old now, but he barely sees me, and I am constantly afraid that he will forget me when he grows up. Based on what I know from a couple of relatives who are still on my side, My family can still see him since they post pictures with my son all the time. I have blocked Thomas and my son. They still live with my ex-in-laws, and basically everyone can see them except me. I can't imagine anything more heartbreaking than that. I got a job at a friend's company, but it's a startup, and they don't really make much for now, so my salary is not what one would expect from a woman in her 30s. Even the other employees there are all in their early 20s. They are just there for the experience to be able to move on to better opportunities. So, yes, I get alimony every month, but it's really not enough because I still have to maintain the lifestyle I had before, and I can't exactly live like a single woman and cut back on expenses. But this is all I have right now because of the huge gap on my resume. I had believed that once I got back on my feet financially, I would apply for joint custody again, and maybe I would have a chance then. But the opportunity literally fell into my lap a couple of weeks ago when my parents reached out to me after months of not speaking to ask for my help. The help they needed was for me to get him off the hook, because surprisingly, Thomas wasn't the wonderful guy they thought he was. My brother sent me an email saying he needed me to come to his house ASAP because they had discovered something huge, and they wanted me to know because they were fed up with hiding things from me and wanted to be a part of my life again. I tried to ignore that email that day, but I couldn't help but think that maybe this would help me with my son. So I went to their house that afternoon. When I went, I expected them to be living like kings because they had betrayed me for money from my ex-in-laws, but they were living worse than before. However, my son was excited to see me, who was with them, so that was the icing on the cake of a fantastic afternoon. When I visited my family that day, they literally started begging for forgiveness as soon as I walked in the door, because apparently they had realized how bad they had done it and there was no turning back. But they still wanted me to forgive them after the divorce when they approached my ex-in-laws and Thomas to ask them about the money they had been promised. Thomas told my family that was no longer going to happen. Apparently, it had only been hinted that they would be compensated handsomely if they turned against me and testified in their favor, but there was nothing in writing to prove it. And if my family tried to go back and tell me all of this, then they would make sure they would never see my son again. So, for my son's sake, they decided to keep their mouths shut, even though they weren't even getting paid for it, like they had been promised. But it got worse because they had been used terribly. Not only had they been manipulated into testifying against me, but they were also being treated like free babysitters. Thomas dropped our son off at my parents' house every day, and they had to take care of him. It was very inconvenient, because even my dad and my brother had jobs to attend to, and my mother couldn't handle all the housework and take care of her grandson alone because she was getting older. So my dad had to work from home some days, and it was getting really difficult for them. So they contacted me to put an end to this once and for all. Apparently, they wanted to make a deal with me and said that if I gave them the money that my ex-in-laws promised them this time, they would take my side in court and make sure I got custody of my son. I was about to suggest it myself, but honestly, it wasn't surprising that they did it. My family had always been very materialistic, and even more so now that my dad's business had failed and they were back working for other people. Obviously, they would want money more than ever now because my dad wanted to retire, but he didn't even have enough money saved since he had invested all his money in the business, and it ended up failing. They said they could make up some story about how they had been pressured and forced to testify against me, so they couldn't be accused of perjury while they were under oath. But few knew I didn't really need help. I had been recording everything they said from the moment I set foot in the house because I knew something was wrong and I didn't want to take any chances. So I had everything recorded anyway. But nevertheless, I told my family to send me screenshots if they had any to prove that they had been used and lied to. And then I told them that I would help them, and I left. I had already seen my son and had more than enough evidence to return to file for custody. So that's what I did the next day with my lawyers, and this time I was prepared. The custody case is still ongoing, but one thing is for sure. I will be able to prove that none of the things Thomas accused me of were true, and my family had been lying the whole time. I have already played the recording, and that has significantly tilted things in my favor. Thomas and his lawyer are literally desperately searching for evidence in their favor, and I am watching it, enjoying it, because this is what they did to me last time, and now I get to do it to them. It's karma at its finest, and I couldn't be happier about it. The only thing that has been less than ideal is that they have claimed that I also used them like Thomas did, and that I had no right to record them without their consent and use it against them. But in my state, it is completely fine and admissible in court. So I didn't understand what they were referring to until they told me that I had betrayed their trust by recording them. These are bold words from people who first betrayed my trust by taking my ex-husband's side in the custody case. They believe what I did was wrong because what they did was out of necessity. They needed the money. But I didn't need to harm them and put them at risk of perjury because they had already agreed to help me and testify against Thomas and his family, so I didn't have to go behind his back. They have been messaging me non-stop, and it's getting more and more annoying. I think they deserve it, and there's not much to discuss here. Update. Hello everyone. The custody case is still ongoing, and Thomas and their lawyer are doing everything they can to prove that they have been telling the truth, because of course, they could face charges. And that is a serious crime, so they could be sentenced to prison. But it's really not my concern at the moment, and it shouldn't have been in the first place. I don't even know why I cared about my parents when they clearly didn't care about me when it was my turn. So it's really just give and take at this point. The comments section opened my eyes to how extremely entitled my parents are. Despite being a parent, I had already severed ties with my parents. Everyone can go where they know I want my son to be well and with me. I have waited long enough for this, and I am not going to allow the constant victimization of my family and myself. If they can betray me for money, I don't think it's necessary to show them loyalty. Let them rot. Update 2. The good news is that I finally got custody of my son. I have never felt so much happiness in my entire life. The other good news is that my ex-in-laws, Thomas, and my family were accused of perjury. Yes, they could go to jail for it. I bet they regret everything now, but I don't care about any of that because I got what I wanted. I got my son back, and that's all I had asked for. From what I know, Thomas is still trying to fight and avoid jail, but I don't think it will work. I have already filed a restraining order against all of them because I have been receiving very threatening text messages, and I am 100% sure they are from these people, because no one else I know would want to hurt me unless it's them. Things have been really busy and chaotic in the last few weeks, but I'm learning to slow down. Now, I desperately want to spend more time with my son, so I've decided to reduce my work hours. I've also thought about selling the house and moving to a smaller apartment so I can save more money. I still have a lot of work to do. Rebuilding my relationship with my son will not be an easy task, because although he is happy to be with me, he still asks about his dad and his grandparents. I don't know what to tell him. He has told me some things about them, like how he had been living with his grandparents for the most part, and his dad and my ex-in-laws were only with him for part of the day. Whenever I ask him what it was like living with his grandparents, he grimaces and says, "It wasn't so great because everyone was constantly fighting." I can completely understand that. It seems like they really put him through something difficult just because they didn't want to take responsibility. I can't imagine why they would treat a child like that. But I wouldn't be surprised at these people, though. I don't have to worry about it anymore because now he's with me. Update 3. Hello, everyone. I can't believe I'm back here after almost 5 years. It feels a little unreal how different my life is right now. 5 years is a long time, and so much has changed. The first thing is how much my son has grown. We have a beautiful relationship right now, and after countless hours of therapy, he and I have finally become the mother and son we should have been from the beginning. He is growing up to be a wonderful man, and I am sure he will be nothing like his father, because I just know in my heart he is. He is 9 years old right now, and he is already a perfect gentleman. I am raising him alone, and I have full custody because Thomas gave up and moved to Europe after he got out of jail. I can't say I'm surprised. He left with his co-worker that he had been cheating on me with, and now they are married. I guess he just replaced his biological son with the other child. It's horrendous, but that's the type of person he is. After the criminal trial, I also started a civil trial where I obtained $50,000 from my ex-husband and his family for all the damage that had been caused to me. The truth is that I did not feel much strength to continue in litigation after everything that happened. I just wanted to be with my son, but also inside of me, I still felt anger for everything we went through, and it is money that is very useful for us now. I still haven't touched it, and it will probably be for my son's college fund in the future. As soon as my parents and brother got out of jail after 6 months for good behavior, we haven't kept in touch, and they didn't try to contact me after getting out, which I'm grateful for, because anyway, I don't think I would have had anything to say to them. I don't have any news about my ex's in-laws. I haven't heard from them or been contacted in years, and I think it's for the best. I'm living my life now. I have a stable job and a steady income, by the grace of God. I'm still working at the company where I started my business friend, and it's going pretty well. So, life turned out well for me, my son, and it's more than I could have asked for. I'm truly grateful for everything.